Growing plants is getting harder, more expensive, more complex, increasingly more difficult. I'm Chad Masura, CEO and founder of Rosie, and this is How We Grow. Alrighty, welcome back to How We Grow. I'm excited for this conversation because so many growers are thinking about the same challenges right now. How do we grow a better plant while using water, fertilizer, labor, and substrate more efficiently? So I'm super excited to have Dr. Jeb Fields on the show today. He's an assistant professor of nursery crops at the University of Florida, where his work focuses on soilless substrate science, irrigation, and fertilizer management, plus plant water relationships, substrate stratification, and more efficient nursery production systems. A lot of things I love to nerd out about, so it's going to be a fun convo. A lot of this research gets into the physical side of growing media, how water moves through a container, how roots respond to different substrate structures, and how growers can ultimately rethink container systems to improve performance without simply adding more input. So today we're going to talk about a ton of fun things, from substrate stratification to water efficiency to the future of soilless substrates, and ultimately, what growers should know before changing their media or irrigation systems they depend on every day. So with that, Jeb, super excited to have you on. Thanks for joining. Excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. So to dive into it, for growers who don't necessarily live in the research world, like, how would you explain what soilless substrate science, we'll say that 3 times, soilless substrate science actually is?
Yeah, so soilless substrate science, or substrate science, you could also call it growing media science. It's just a deeper dive into the development or creation of potting soils, basically. So it sounds a lot more fancy than it is. I grew up really liking soils. I grew up really liking plants. As I took my career through to where it is now, I kept finding moving into the container and in a soilless culture was more and more interesting. And so we don't use soils, we use substrates or growing media. And so it's just like if you took a class on soil science, it's very broad. It's everything to do with soils. And substrate science is a fun little term we use for the same thing, but in a container.
Great. And so, walk me a little bit through that sort of genesis story. Like, how did you find yourself in this world? How did you get so interested in substrates?
Yeah, it's a funny story, and I kind of fell into it, and it's a great happenstance. But I wanted to go to graduate school. When I went to the University of Florida. I'm from Florida, so back home where I'm at. And I wanted to go to graduate school, but I wasn't sure what. I liked horticulture. I love plants. I was really interested for a little bit in genetics and breeding. I worked in a genetics lab, realized I was not interested in genetics and breeding. It was not the path I wanted. And I really liked growing plants. I liked production. But I was always also interested in the nursery side, a lot of different plant materials. In Florida, a lot of my undergraduate was in citrus production. And while that was great, it was very, for lack of a better word, boring to me. It was the same plant every time. And so I really liked the idea of the ornamental world, where in one plot we might grow 40 to 100 different taxa of plant that are all from different bedding plants and annuals up to trees and shrubs and everything. So that really excited me. So I emailed a professor, several professors around the country looking for something, and a faculty in North Carolina State contacted me, and he was looking for graduate students, and it came up, it was a fit, and he was in production horticulture. When I got there, we visited and talked about, his focus was in growing media. Soilless substrate science was Dr. Brian Jackson and actually Dr. Bill Fontenot, who worked together at North Carolina State. And I really liked it. I enjoyed what they did. I had never considered substrates as a path. In fact, I didn't know you could get a master's degree in potting soil at the time, but you certainly can, and I did. And then I thought it was kind of a temporary thing. I was going to go into more production and understand more of everything, but I just really clicked and I loved it. And so I decided for my PhD, which I knew I wanted, I was going to stay into substrate science. And so I did want to go back into the nursery side. They were more in greenhouse production, which is really fun, but I like the outdoor chaotic nature of the nursery and a little more laid back settings, as opposed to where greenhouses are very precise and precision. Nursery, we have a little more flexibility. It's a little more, I don't want to say casual, but it is more of a casual production style. And so I did my PhD at Virginia Tech with Dr. Jim Owen, who was the nursery specialist, which really got me interested in extension. So I was working with growers, still focusing on that substrate science. And then I got a job at LSU. I was with the LSU Ag Center for 7 years before moving back home to Florida for the same position. And I've been really focusing on growing media ever since, as my labs just kind of evolved. And I love all aspects of production, but there's so much of a need and I want to say a vacuum for growing media science in our world that it just kept falling into place. I was like, this is really where I want to be. There's so much opportunity to make an impact. And if you think about the world as a landscape in agriculture, we're seeing a shift to soilless production. And again, I don't want to pick on any specific field, but there's hundreds of scientists researching every aspect of production around the world, maybe thousands on specific species, on irrigation management, on pest management. And there's so few of us working on soilless substrates. And so it was a great place to make an impact. It was what I really interested me. It what got me excited. And so it just all worked out and clicked. And I've been doing this for, I went back in 2010 to start my master's. So it's been 16 years now. I've been a substrate scientist and I love every minute of it.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. I feel like there's such a dearth of good substrate research out there. And especially as we start to think about different inputs and how they affect physical characteristics and chemical characteristics, it feels like every question we have doesn't quite have an answer to it or has a very qualified answer at best,
Exactly. There's such an opportunity for exploration here.
Yeah.
It's when we think about other agriculture, I tell my students this, we're not past the age of discovery per se, but it feels like we're more in the age of refinement. And I think in soilless substrates, there's so much new that we're still in that age of discovery. And so that's what's exciting mostly to me, that it's everything we do is groundbreaking. It's great.
Yeah, totally. And I think to that point, most people, when they think about substrates, they think purely ingredients, this is a bark base, this is a peat base, whatever it is, but there's so much more to it. So I'm curious, like, how do you go one level deeper with folks when you start to talk about substrates?
Yeah, the ingredients are very important. It makes up what it is. But when you look at a substrate as a substrate scientist, to get a little technical, I look and I don't see the materials themselves. We see all the action that happens, the water interaction, the fertility, the root growth happens in the voids between the substrate particles and the pores. So the substrate components themselves just make up different physical structures. We call it a matrix. And so when we dive down into substrate science, and at my deepest core level, I'm a substrate physicist. I love the air and water balance within the container. I love how the irrigation interacts with it. I love the hydrology, if you will, of the media. And so all that is taking away this is bark, this is peat. And those are very important topics that have made my career on. So I don't want to nullify them, but we really want to look at this as a matrix that allows different pore structures to exist. And that's what the plant experiences. That's what the water experiences. That's what the fertilizer experiences. And so really, I tell people, it's funny a lot of people don't realize that a growing media is usually about 85% space. So you're buying a bag of potting soils or a truckload if you're a wholesale nursery, and you're almost entirely on a volume basis paying for air and water. And so when you think about it like that, it's very different. You realize you're just buying this materials, whatever they may be. They create this structure that the plant needs.
Yeah, great. And so as you think about that matrix, you listed the way water moves through it, the way air moves through it, and ultimately the nutrients. I'd love for you to kind of break down each of those. Maybe let's start with air. In the matrix, and why is it important, and how is it affected by different characteristics of a given substrate?
Well, yeah, I think air is probably the reason we use substrates in general. So for the longest time, for thousands of years, plants have been grown in containers of some sorts. There's hieroglyphics on the walls in Egypt where they're bringing citrus trees down, and they do it for transportation so they could put a tree in a palace and move it down to the Nile River to irrigate it and then bring it back. And that works fine. But the problem is when you use a soil in a container, it doesn't really drain too well. And this is because the particles are smaller, and they make very small pores, which hold water too much. And so if it's full of water, then it can't be full of air. Mm-hmm. And so that leads to disease. Plants breathe just like we do through their roots. So roots respire, and so roots need a lot of airspace. And when a plant is planted out in the soil outside, that depth of that soil layer is incredibly deep. And so that allows water to be pulled down through gravity. In a container, we're talking few inches to maybe a couple feet in the largest containers we have. So there's not a lot of gravity acting on that to pull water out. So water sticks in there too much. And so that's why we created soilless media. And I say we had nothing to do with it. Well, that's why as a industry and a species, we created soilless media so we could grow plants in a container more effectively. And so we could shed water. And so really the whole point we use peat moss, pine bark, wood fiber, any of this is to actually allow water to drain out and bring that air in where the roots need it. And so that you wouldn't normally get that in a container filled with soil.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe you've done some research on how water actually moves through a substrate. That's super fascinating to me. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, as weird as it is, I did my whole PhD is really focused on water moving through a substrate. So a very short point in time, a very niche specific field that excites maybe 7 people on the planet. So hopefully those 7 people are watching this. But when we see water move through a container, you got to think of how water is introduced. And then usually I'm going to focus mostly on overhead application. And so we might have a sprinkler, whether it's a rotary sprinkler or a sprayer, and it's sending droplets that are just hitting the surface of this container very slowly. And then sometimes, or a drip system where it's dripping on a very spot, or maybe you have a spray stake and you're spraying water at a little higher concentration, but it's only a narrow area. And so as that water accumulates, it doesn't just move through. If you think of, in soil science, we have a term called piston flow. And so if you think of how a piston works, it's where everything would move down the profile evenly. And that does not happen. Because even if you loaded a bunch of water, it's not going to move like that, because the water is going to move around through the system as it channels down. And as it does, it spreads out, kind of like, picture like a Christmas tree shape, where it gets wider and wider and wider as it goes down, but in tiny little channels. And we call this fingered flow or preferential flow. And so it matters because the root system doesn't grow like that. And so we want to make sure we get water to the root system, because in this water will move back and forth. Some of it will get intercepted by roots, some will get retained by small pores, and some keeps moving down. And the way it works is it moves down through the container till it gets to the bottom. And then because of some physical forces acting on this, some of that water will get held at the bottom of the container, but then a lot of it will leach out. And so that's when we have our leaching. But then there's another force acting on it. At that point, we call it capillary rise or cohesion and tension. And then once the water really gets to the bottom of the container, you'll start to see water move back up. And so then you see capillary rise. So we actually get a backfilling. And that's how containers get really full. We never actually get saturated in soilless media. But when we come close to it, we call it container capacity. It's usually because water has moved through the profile. And then as it starts leaching, some water comes back up. And again, probably more than anyone wants to know about how water moves through a container, but it really lets us understand the substrate and how we can build a substrate to help the root system access more water and become more water efficient through changing to substrate science.
For sure. And I think, from the grower's perspective, it's often, this mix dries out too fast, or this mix holds too much water. And so I'm curious, when you hear both sides of that spectrum, like, what are some of the things you're trying to diagnose, or what are some of your recommendations to try to get it in a better place?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things we talk about when we hear it's too dry, it's too wet. We could change our substrate. I'll talk about this in a second, but when I hear that first, I'm first curious about what setting you're using this in. Or is it in a greenhouse? Is it in a nursery? Is it in an indoor plant? How are you applying irrigation? Are you just using a drip irrigation? Are you using a spray stake that's going to have more coverage, or overhead irrigation, like rotary sprinkler? Because that's really going to change how the water is retained. Because if you think about that surface of the container, if I flip it over, if you're just having a few points where irrigation is going to come, you're going to stay dry at the top. And if you have a more uniform spread across that surface, you can keep it wetter a bit. So those are my first things: is how are you using it, and how are you irrigating it, and also what plants are you growing? Because some plants want to be wet, some plants want to be dry, most plants want to be right in the middle, as we all do. But those are all really important questions to ask that I talk to growers, and that's the first thing I ask before we get into the substrate. What are you doing to it? What are you growing? What do you want? But then when we kind of break through that, there's lots of things we can do to change the substrate, to change that water holding ability, basically. And you're just talking about changing the container capacity or how much water it can hold. So we can make what we call in the industry, you might hear the words tighter mix or a finer particle. And this is just means smaller pores to hold more water. So we have a moisture balance in a container. It's drier at the top than it is the bottom. And it's different based on a couple forces of gravity and particle size and porosity. But we can change those particle sizes to hold more water, or we can make them larger particles to drain more. And that's really when we get into like aggregates in a potting soil. You might have bark or a perlite or any other coarse material that's being included is going to help improve drainage. And then you have more of your water holding materials or your fine bark, which can also be fine bark. It's all relative, really, or peat moss or coconut coir or some of these fibrous materials that are going to hold water. And so we can change a substrate to improve drainage or cut water, but oftentimes you can also just look at your other practices to make those same changes.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned this word substrate stratification as well. I'm curious what that is in plain English and what the implications are for growers around stratification.
Yeah, so stratification is a concept that's nothing novel, but it's something that I developed with my former PhD advisor, Jim Owen, when he was at Virginia Tech about 8-9 years ago. We've been working on it as a way to change that air and water porosity. And just for the most simplistic term, stratification, we're just layering different media in a container. So any gardening class you go to, your first horticulture class ever, it's always going to get brought up putting gravel or large particles at the bottom of the container. And everyone always tells you don't do it. And that is absolutely right, because by putting these large particles in the bottom of the container, we change the profile of the substrate. So you're actually making the actual substrate layer shorter in that container, which is going against what we talked about at the beginning, the container effect, and it's increasing the water holding capacity of the container because you have a less of a depth for gravity. So stratification is harnessing that power that we're always told not to do, but doing it strategically, and it really gives us a benefit. So just when we use our stratification, we put different materials on, we put a coarse substrate on the bottom of a finer substrate, we're basically defying gravity, which is gravity wants to push water down the container. Just if you, like Isaac Newton, you drop an apple, it goes to the ground. You put water in the top of a container, it's going to go to the bottom, eventually come out. So if we put a fine mix on the top to retain water where gravity dictates water should leave, and then we put a coarse mix on the bottom of a container to help improve drainage where gravity really dictates water should pile up, it gives us a more uniform moisture gradient across the container. I kind of mentioned that at the beginning of the talk or podcast, where it's drier at the top, wetter at the bottom. And so stratification in its most simplistic form really can counteract that and give us a even moisture distribution, which is more like what a plant is going to experience in nature. If you go dig in the soil, there is a layer of gravity of it's dry at the top and the bottom, but it's very gradual. We have this extreme change in the container, so it gives the plant more what it's used to. Now, going a step further, what we've been really working on stratification, once we found that we had the ability to change the moisture balance, we also gives us a way to incorporate fertilizer, but just in the top half. As fertilizer leaches, it moves down the profile. And so if you just put it in the top of the container, you get that fertilizer longer in the container. And those are all great things, but the biggest impact it's had is reducing peat moss or any expensive substrate. So we've done a lot of work on using what we call a filler material or a cheap, low-cost substrate like a pine bark or a wood fiber in the bottom of a container, and then using your high-performance peat-based substrate or peat-based media on the top. You get all the benefits of that peat-based substrate, but you're only using half of it. So stratification inherently just gives us a 50% reduction of peat or any expensive material without the loss of productivity. And so that's the most exciting thing. Well, I love nerding out about the hydraulics of the air and water balance, because that's what we started this on. That's where we kind of built that concept. It's really the peat reduction that is where it's getting its benefit and its biggest impact from.
Yeah, interesting. And so tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, how are you thinking about substrate alternatives, whether that be alternatives to peat or, some of the kind of newer inputs and technologies? What are some of the things you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming in. So we've got a lot of studies globally on transition of the horticulture industry to soilless production, and it's really impactful. We use less water, we use less fertilizer, we get to grow plants closer to food deserts if you're growing for food, or a non-arable soil, so you're not reusing the soil, so it helps with soil health. So there's a lot of reasons to transfer and transition into containers. There's a lot of misinformation and information out there about peat and the benefits or the detriments of using it. I won't get too deep into that, but the real fact of the matter is we have to find new materials because of the expansion of the industry. Peat is sustainably harvested in a lot of places in North America. It hasn't been in Europe, but it doesn't matter because it's out there and there's just not enough, or we're not pulling enough out of the ground because we're harvesting sustainably in North America to satisfy this industry that is predicted to grow 400% in the next 20 years. And so that means all the substrate we use, we're going to need 4 times that to keep up with this growth in the next 20 or 30 years. And that's a lot of material. And so we can't just harvest more peat. So we have to find new materials. And so the reason is it's important there. Some of the alternative materials, or even not alternatives anymore, the more common non-peat use materials, again, is bark material we're using a lot in the nursery industry. Coconut coir is also a very famous one, and wood fiber is also probably the biggest change in the last 10 or 15 years of the onset of wood fiber. It's pretty ubiquitous now. I don't even consider it an alternative material. And those are doing a really good job to lift a lot of this void that's going to be created, but we're still going to need more materials. And so what I like to do is look at regionality, because instead of looking globally, we're not going to just dig a hole on some island somewhere and find a vast resource that's going to replace peat. And you're not going to find anything that's going to grow plants just as good as the peat use. And so we want to find other materials that can maybe be regional and that might be less of a massive global supply, but more of a regional availability that could be performed pretty well. And so one of the ones I work with a lot is sugarcane bagasse. There's a lot of sugarcane industry in the Southeast U.S., and I was in Louisiana and I'm in Florida. Those are the 2 biggest sugar producing states. And for anyone that doesn't know, sugar's like it's a grass. And so it's a long cane. And basically they harvest this, they grind this cane up to extract the sugar. There's several processes of sugar extraction, and it's left with this really nice fibrous material. And there is a lot of this fibrous material. And so it's things like that, using regional wastes, agricultural fibers, more than actually, a lot of people think we might plant something for substrates, and that might be true eventually, but it's really about identifying regional wastes or regional extra materials and finding ways to recycle those. And so here in the Southeast, sugarcane fibers, there's other fibers like miscanthus grass, canaf fibers, maybe hemp or cannabis fibers. If you go up to more of a nut producing regions, there's a lot of talk on using nut shells, and there's just all different materials. And I don't want to diminish substrate science, but there's a lot of scientists that are actually true that say anything will work. And it really does that way. And that's another part of what I do. We find a biomass that's available, unless it's toxic or something, which we won't get into. We can process it in a way to make it a viable component. And so that's the really cool thing about growing media is, back to that very beginning, it's a structure, as long as it's not toxic again, or any phytotoxins will change it. So we can take what we have, like the sugarcane fibers, and find a way to process that to build a structure that we want. And that's a lot of the other side of my lab on the materials source side is doing. And it's looking for processing procedures, whether we're grinding it, whether we're extruding it, extracting it, what have you, aging and stabilizing these materials. But what do we have to do to take the raw material and make it a growing media component?
Cool.
And
Super
doing
cool.
that regionally, so we don't have to transport it across the world or across the country.
Yeah. And so what does that look like with the sugarcane fibers? I mean, what work have you done so far with it? What's looking promising? What are some of the challenges? I'm curious, when you get down to the input level, what that starts to look like.
Yeah, there's a lot. Again, like you pull a bag of potting soil off the shelf, you don't think that there's been decades of research that goes into those components and that materials, but it really has. So we're kind of in our infancy on this. It's very promising because first and foremost, it's available. There's a lot of bagasse fibers out there in the southeastern United States and globally. There's a ton of sugar. It's one of the biggest, most produced crops, agronomic crops we have, and so it creates this fiber. And so that's first and foremost. Is there a supply? And yes, there is. Now, what do we have to do? We have a high, so because it's very organic, it breaks down really quick. We have a high nitrogen drawdown index, which is basically just the bacteria use the nitrogen in it to break the carbon down to compost it or decompose it, which is not ideal for growing media. So how do we stabilize it and stop that breakdown? Every mill also has a slightly different product that's coming out. And as a grower, any grower knows, if I say I want this bark or I want this peat this year, I want it next year the same. I want everything the same. And so finding ways to make it uniform. And so what we're doing right now is looking at different grinds or ways to bring these raw fibers into a uniform particle size. So like I said, we're still in our infancy. I've got growers using it because there is opportunities to use it raw or fresh or right away. But I think if we want to get it mainstream commercialized, it's just going to take a few more years of identifying the best practices for taking it from that raw form to the final use form. But really, we're focusing on how to change the structure of the fiber because, again, that's the goal, is building the matrix the way we want it.
Yeah, cool. And so as you're thinking about trialing new inputs, or as you're working with growers that are thinking about experimenting, like what are some of the recommendations you make for the trial design, how to think about it, what to record, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm mostly an extension appointment, which means I work with growers and help do these trials all the time. And so that's actually I think one of the most fun parts of the job. And I start always with the question is, what do you want? So we can design trials to answer any question we want, basically. And so there's the global, like, what do I do? And that's just, if you break that down, that's hundreds of different questions put together. So it's really refining. Yeah. And that's what we're trained when we get our graduate degrees and we're trained in science. It's refining our questions. So what are your questions? Do you want to reduce your peat and have no changes? Do you want to change your irrigation practices, or do you want to not change your irrigation practices? It's countless. And so my first thing is, what are you doing? And the second thing is to know that really nothing we do is going to be just make a change and it's going to be just better all around. All of our cultural practices are interwoven. There's no standalones. If I change irrigation, it's going to have effect on fertility. It's going to have effect on the media. It's going to have effect on the root growth. It's going to have effect on the container root zone temperature. It's going to have effect on the pest management and the disease suppression. And so you can't really change one thing alone. So we have to design these holistic trials. And because of that, we get a lot of things wrong sometimes, and that's just the way of it. That's like science. If we knew the outcome, we wouldn't do the research. We'd just make the product. And so what I first caution growers with is making big changes. And so we usually start with small trials. Trial what you're doing, change one thing, see what happens, and then we refine that trial. Some growers really like advanced research, and we'll get in with them and we'll work and we'll make several different changes, but we do it on a small scale. And I think that's really important, is evaluating on a small scale, but also never being complacent. Lots of operations I've been to never do any trials, and they're doing well. The old, if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality, and that works, but it doesn't actually let you move forward. And so I think what I tell growers, the most important thing is, no matter how well designed or how much effort or care you put into it, every single operation should have some sort of trialing site, some little small corner off to the side that you don't care about, that you let someone or any of your innovative employees or you just try something new. You don't have to call us in. I know every extension faculty is excited to come when we have a grower say, I have this question, can you help me? But some growers don't want to go through that. So if you just want to play with something, just play around, try something new, you're going to see results. And then that's how you move forward. And so that's my biggest thing, is whatever you're doing, trial something.
Yeah, nice. And then in those early trials, are there specific indicators you're looking for specific data sets you're looking for, or is it kind of depends on the
It
outcome?
depends on what you're doing, but I mean,
Yeah.
the first and foremost is look at the plant. You don't have to take super data. We take way too much data in science, and I think that's what a lot of especially when I work with the growers, like you're doing way too much. But is the plant healthy? Did you use less of something and it's healthy? Did it save you some money? It's healthy. Did the plant get better? This is just an inherent. Sometimes plants get sold. Did the plants that you trialed get sold before the plants that you didn't trial, or are they the last in maybe a block? There's 10 plants left over out of 500, and those are the experimental ones. Then maybe there's something there. So it doesn't have to be quantitative.
Yeah.
Quantitative research is a next level thing, and it's very important. And we need quantitative research, but it's really qualitative. It's subjective. Look at that plant. Does it look struggling? Did I see something? Am I seeing a lot of runoff? Is my fertilizer not working as well or not being effective? Is the plant just dying? I mean, a lot of times we'll do something and the plant will die. Is it holding too much water? Is it not holding any more water? Do I have to change more irrigation? So I would say be more qualitative than quantitative and be more subjective with research and just look at things.
Cool. Just try it,
Yeah.
basically.
Just try it. I mean, that's really what you got to do. Again,
Yeah.
I never really go back to the complacency, but all the innovative growers and operations that I deal with, or the ones that are big and continue to move forward, be successful, are changing things. They're not keeping the same thing from one year to the next because it works. Because there's always like I said, we're in the age of discovery and refinement. There's new information coming out every year, every season. The companies, I know most people will work with a sales rep for a company, and the company will come and say, I've got this new fertilizer, I've got this new chemistry for pests, I've got this new material, and they'll try that. You don't have to have the sales reps coming out to tell you to trial something. Just if you're curious, change it. If you're worried about growing media or just interested in it, and try something with what you have nearby. You might look down the road and there's a horse farm, or there's a I don't know where you're at. There could be something, and there's or materials around. So look at what's close to you and say, hey, maybe I can use this to cut some costs, or mix this in my mix and give it a shot.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I have to ask, have you done any work with biochar, or where do you sit on the biochar kind of conversation?
Yeah, actually, I've got a graduate student right now. This is perfect timing. She did her name is Megan Gibb. She just finished up her thesis work on biochar growing media. She actually defends next week. So I know this might not be as timely when this comes out, but we've done some projects on looking at biochar and greenhouse peat-based substrates and large nursery container substrates to find those value-added benefits. And I think there are definitely benefits of biochar in it. And one of the things we've come to is that when it comes to biochar, I think, and this is the same thing that happened with peat early on, or wood fiber or bark, we just say these terms as a generalized term.
Yeah.
If you go to someone in agriculture, you say soil, it actually doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's just something out there. So if I say biochar, there's so many different ways of pyrolysis. There's so many different feedstocks. There's different particle sizes. So what works in one situation doesn't work in the other. And so I think our biggest takeaway with biochar as we develop these value-added benefits is classifying what biochar is and what the word itself means. And biochar actually is more of a verb than a noun, basically. Yeah, it's not a product. It's a way of developing a product. And so there's some biochars that are fantastic. There's some biochars that don't have as many value-added benefits, and it's really defining those that's important.
Definitely. And what we found is different types of biochars can actually, the characteristics can cancel each other out. So we found, if you hit a sort of maximum with one type, like a high temp hardwood char or something, you can actually push it further by bringing a different type of char in that complement, one might be macropore dominant, one might be micropore dominant. You can start to like really balance things out by blending them together.
And think of that just like your basic potting soil off the shelf at a store. If you put too much peat in it, it is 100% peat. Guess what? It's not going to grow. It's going to hold way too much water. So we have to add that perlite in, or that bark or something in to generate porosity. So too much of a good thing is not a good thing.
Definitely. What is what's the outcome of the thesis, or do I have to wait till next week to to find
Well,
out.
then the outcome is there's a lot of benefits of what her specific, because in science we take way too much data, we focus way too in very small things. So that's like our global overview. But the idea was to look at improving nutrient retention with biochar, because we have a lot of high cation exchange capacity (CEC), which is basically just fertilizer retention, if you think of on the particles,
Yep.
and really trying to evaluate the level of fertilizer retention. And she also did some work in stratifying biochar to look if we could put maybe biochar strategically in the container to get more benefit, which we could. Really in the top half where that fertilizer is first coming in, loading biochar on the top half, as opposed to incorporating throughout, gave even more benefits. And so that was really what she was focusing on, is how we can use biochar to effectively increase fertilizer efficiency. And there's definitely ways to do it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm excited to see that come out. I'll keep an eye out for it. And I know we're coming up on time. I want to be mindful of your time. So I guess just to close things out, I'm really curious how you're thinking about the future of this sector and the industry in general. Like, what are some of the things that get you super excited or optimistic about the future here?
Yeah, I mean, that question in itself is exciting because I don't know. So if you look at the substrates of today, there's a lot of wood fibers. There's a lot of biochars. We're talking about stratification. 10 years ago, none of that was in there. It was just standard. And so we've advanced so much in the past 10 years, and the 10 years before that. You go back just 30 years ago and they started using bark. We think it's so common, but it wasn't. And then 60 years ago, peat came on. And so it's advancing at a rapid pace that I honestly don't think will recognize the substrate systems of 20 years. I think it's going to change the way we grow plants in just a black plastic container will change so much. And I don't know what those changes are. The layering of stratified, it was a really cool concept when we developed it. It's been really impactful. But what I think the most exciting thing I've heard about it was a group at the USDA several years ago told me they thought this was one of the most innovative new concepts in substrate science in 40 years. And it was just something that Jim and I were sitting around at a coffee shop thinking about where my PhD, what we learned, what could we do with that came from. And we've seen improvements in fertilizer efficiency, irrigation efficiency. We're cutting peat. I didn't even get into the fact, but we're seeing improved disease resilience. We've got a whole big project because it's changing root growth, that it's actually helping plants on retail shelves last a couple days longer. So it's reducing our shrink and improving our shelf life. And that was just a quick thought. It was like, just change what we do. And it's a very minor change. If you go dig a hole outside, it's layered. There's horizons. If you go to a golf course, it's layered. If you go to construction soils, they're layered underneath because you get a lot of control over it. So just this minor change is, I believe, revolutionizing the way containers are. And I think I'm excited for what's next. And I have no idea what it is. Hopefully we find out soon. And there's 4 next in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
But I really think that the substrate industry and the soilless culture production systems of 2040 or 2050 are going to be unrecognizable today. And to me, that's exciting.
For sure. I can't wait. Well, Jeb, this was super fun. I really appreciate you jumping on and chatting with me today. And I guess if folks want to follow along and see more of the research that you and your department are doing, where do you recommend they go?
Yeah, that's great. So I publish in trade magazines all the time. We have you can follow my websites. I do a little bit of social media posting, not too much. I should do a lot more. But the easiest way to get a hold of me is I'm the editor of a pretty large newsletter from Ball Publishing called Nursery and Landscape Insider. And so it comes out every 2 weeks. It goes to about 33,000 growers and landscapers around the world. And I talk about all kinds of different things, plus my research. So I put my research, horticulture news. There's a lot of substrate focus in it. Anything that I think would be valuable for nursery growers, greenhouse growers, and commercial landscapers. And so that's probably the best way to follow up with me. But I actually love just getting emails. If you got a question to me, just send it to me. My email is jsfields@ufl.edu. I get questions from growers around the world, and I'm an extension. That's the most fun to me. I want to solve problems. My lab, we have a motto. It's applied solutions. My goal is to solve problems with very practical and pragmatic ways, and without that interest or those insights, someone saying, hey, I've got an issue with this, I got an issue with that, then I don't know what problems are out there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I love it. I super appreciate your time. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. You too. Yeah, it was great being on here. Thanks for having me.